Hello, good morning to all. Okay, so I invite Dr. Hitz to come and welcome the speaker.
Morning, everybody. My name is Randy Hitz. I'm the Dean of the Graduate School of Education at Portland State. And it's my pleasure to welcome you. I understand you've been welcomed by the President on Sunday, is that right? President Vival, and also the Dean of the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, Karen Marangel. So you know everything already that you need to know about Portland State, right? And about Portland, great city, great university, and I hope you have a chance to really experience the town a little bit. The Graduate School of Education, we prepared elementary, secondary teachers, special education, and counselors, and also people to work in higher education as well. And we work very closely with this terrific mathematics department on the campus, and I think this conference is a really good example of how closely we work with that department, which is, I think, a pretty unique department too, because they emphasize mathematics education, and they're so strong in that area. So we're real pleased to be partners with them. I want to say thank you to Shapna Mogotapai and to Brian Greer for their tremendous leadership. They came to me, gosh, well over a year ago, asking about the potential for doing this conference, and I thought it was a terrific opportunity for Portland State, for the city of Portland, and hopefully it's been a good opportunity for you too. And they gave me my reading assignment. Wow, you guys are serious about your that's amazing. So and great speakers, I understand. We've got one today for sure coming right up. Yeah, the thing I love about this and the work that Shapna is doing with her colleagues, and for so long, for some reason, and I'm not sure where it came from, but we've created this mindset around the world that some people are good in math and some people aren't, right? And that's simply not okay. It's not. First of all, it's not true that everybody has far more potential to learn mathematics and to contribute in mathematics than what we allow them, right? And so the work that this organization is doing is fundamentally important, I think, in changing that mindset. And what we often forget, and I know the speaker is going to talk about that, the social justice issue, but it really becomes a social justice issue when you get this huge gap between some populations that think that they're not good in mathematics and others that think that are successful in mathematics. And mathematics is such a key to all kinds of success and quality of life throughout the world. And so what you're doing is fundamentally important to improving education for all students. And if we're going to really have a more just and democratic society, which is what this is about, right? A just and democratic society, then we've got to make sure that good mathematics instruction is accessible to everybody, right? And that we help every student reach his or her full potential. Anyway, so I just thank you so much for what you're doing and wish you well, and I look forward to the next speaker this morning.
Thank you. Can you hear me? I don't think that actually I really have the teacher's voice. I think everybody can hear me. So it's my pleasure to actually introduce the speaker, Bob Peterson. He's going to speak on weaving social justice in elementary mathematics. Yes, I mean, as all of us know, we have all looked at his site, Rethinking Schools. A few words about him. He's the president of Milwaukee Teachers Education Association. He taught at the La Escuela Fraternity, a two-way bilingual school for many years. He's the founding editor of Rethinking Schools magazine. He's a frequent writer and a speaker. He co-edited with Bill Bigelow, I hope I got the name correct, Rethinking Globalization, Teaching for Justice in an Unjust World, and Rethinking Columbus, the Next 500 Years. He co-edited with Michael Charney, Transforming Teacher Unions, Fighting for Better Schools and Social Justice, and with Eric Gutstein, whose book we all also have used many times, Rethinking Mathematics, Teaching Social Justice by Numbers. After his talk, the reaction, Tony Cotton will react to the talk. He is the Honorary Secretary of Association of Teachers of Mathematics, England, for the last 4 years. He's an independent writer, educator with more than 35 years of engagement in mathematics education and a member of the Labour Party. So I invite Professor Bob Peterson to deliver his talk.
Thank you very much. We'll just get this plugged
Walk
in.
with the mic, sorry. One small announcement, and we'll make announcements at the end of the talk.
Thank you. It is a real pleasure and honor to speak to such a learned, committed group of mathematicians and math educators. I'll tell a little more about myself and then talk a lot about math and social justice. I was born in Madison, Wisconsin. My mother was a homemaker and retail worker. My father was a science professor, a soil science professor at UW-Madison, a university that's under attack by a person who wants to be president. I grew up in a white neighborhood. I went to an all-white school, attended an all-white church, watched all-white TV shows. Even our house was painted white. And I unconsciously learned that one of the biggest privileges of being white in this society is that one doesn't have to think about race, of being white. It's perceived that many things are it's just universal. So when you think of classical music, many people think of European classical music versus other forms of classical music. Now, my life changed dramatically at age 12 when my father moved me and my two brothers and my mother to Africa. We lived in Cairo, Egypt. He worked with the Ministry of Agriculture for a couple years. And spending my formative years in a country that was not white, that was not Christian, that did not speak English, did not even use a Roman alphabet, really punched a hole in the white cocoon that I had been encapsulated in. One incident in Egypt really set me strongly on a social justice pattern in my life. My parents had said, let's go on a picnic. In fact, that's how they told us originally how we were going to move to Egypt. We're going to have a picnic by the pyramids. I said, okay, really? And so it was a hot day. My father suggested we go. My mother packed a lunch. My older brother was a juvenile diabetic, and we had imported dietetic soda 4,000 miles away to be in Egypt, because at that time the only thing you could get was Coca-Cola in glass bottles. We drove 20 miles away. Turn off my wireless. Okay, well, I should start. Well, good. I'm starting the timer now, so I just saved a few minutes. Okay, I think I might have to turn off my own wireless here. Okay, let me just pause, try to do it, see if I can handle this. It's gonna, wireless off, do slideshow, and we are ready to roll. Okay. So we drove 20 kilometers south of Cairo to a pyramid that we're going to climb called the Red Pyramid. We parked our car on the edge of the desert and started eating lunch, and before long, a group of children from the neighborhood village came up and asked for bakshish. They wanted something which they couldn't have. My father said, well, don't give them anything or else pretty soon everybody's from the village is going to be circling our car. So we said, no, and they just stepped back. But then as we left, my father said to my brother Don, who had the 2 aluminum cans of dietetic soda, and he had drunk them, to throw them out. And out the window, as we left, he threw them out the window. The children jumped upon them, and I watched. and they started playing with them. And as we left, I thought, wow, they're playing with the trash that my family threw out. And the rest of the day I thought of that, and it really had a profound impact on me. And it's sort of an existential question of, why was I born? What's the chance of birth? Why was I born in a middle-class family in Madison instead of in a village on the Nile River? And after returning to Madison, well, actually, no, I had many experiences in Egypt. One that really connected to math was, and it also pointed out my start of social justice activity 48 years ago. I went to a private school, Cairo American College. We had a really lousy math teacher in 8th grade. So lousy that I organized an entire student walkout of her junior high asking that she be fired. And the principal didn't like it, and nor did my parents like it when he called. But it's interesting because I tell that story as I ran for union office. One of the first things I did was I tried to get rid of a lousy teacher. And people look at me, and because I believe, and I tell my union members that if there's a teacher down the hall or a school down the street that you wouldn't send your own kid to, then we as a union, we as professionals have work to do. We can't wash our hands and say, oh, administration's supposed to do that. No, we have to do that. Coming back to Madison, I was active. It was a very heady time, busy time, and I became a student organizer from my junior high experience, fighting for student rights, against the Vietnam War, for the civil rights folks in the movement. I had the opportunity to meet Fannie Lou Hamer, activist from Mississippi. She was beaten brutally doing voter registration work, and she came up to Madison on a regular basis to get medical assistance for that. And I also did a lot of reading, and one of the books that I read in high school was Pedagogy of the Press by Paulo Freire. It just had been published in the early 70s. And I realized through all this that I was asking the wrong question. It's not why was I born where I was? The question is, what am I going to do about this incredible inequality that I saw and experienced not only in Egypt and other places we visited, but also in Mississippi when I visited Fannie Lou Hamer. So a couple years of dropping in and out of college, hitting factory work, dock worker, I finally became a teacher, and for 30 years surrounded myself with 10 and 11-year-olds. My wife says it permanently warped my sense of humor. And it has. But I believe passionately that as we teach, we have a moral and civic responsibility to teach the next generation about justice, about thinking about justice, and thinking about what different perspectives and in whose interest certain perspectives hold. I also believe that children should have the right to learn at least 2 languages, including their mother tongue. And that's one reason I helped start a school. And as I said, I was surrounded by these kids. My wife's a professional photographer, so the good ones are hers, the lousy ones are mine. That's hers. And I came to think that principles of social justice teaching, I put this out on a flyer. I know a bad teaching technique, you pass out things in advance, people sit in there, read it if I get boring. But I also know that people who might not speak English as a second language, it's obviously easier to have English as a first language. It might be easier to see some things. So first of all, I think classrooms, my principle, classrooms should be laboratories for social justice. They should be the kind of society that we want to have, we want to create. Schools should be centers of renaissance and resistance. Teachers should be as organic, activist intellectuals, and teacher unions should transform themselves to be social justice teacher unions. That's sort of what I've lived my life as, and it's been a long life so far. I hope it continues. We started rethinking schools in my 6th year of teaching. First, it was a tabloid. We passed it out free to all the teachers. It was a Milwaukee area newspaper. We never had enough money to publish the next issue for a couple years. And then I met Bill Bigelow, actually, at a conference, and we put out Rethinking Columbus. Made us national. This was actually the second edition. It was at the time of the quincentennial in 1992, and we tried to project, and I think we did a fairly good job of a native approach to the Columbus approach. The Columbus Quincentenary. Ever since then, in my 5th grade classroom, we've put Columbus on trial for genocide every year. I can talk about that if people are interested. Out of Rethinking Our Classroom, we outlined what it meant to be classrooms as laboratories for social justice. Again, it's listed on your thing, but quickly, grounded in the lives of students. These are things that I heard all day yesterday. Critical, multicultural, anti-racist, pro-justice, participatory, experiential, hopeful, visionary, activist, academically rigorous, and culturally and linguistically sensitive. We finally became a magazine, and it's started charging for our stuff. We realized that if as I started the publication, it was started on my kitchen table with an Apple IIe computer and a can of rubber cement. That in publishing, you do it for preaching or profit. We wanted to preach. But we ultimately found out we had to profit a little in order to continue. So I recommend anybody who can assign books for their college courses, consider assigning Rethinking Mathematics that I co-authored with Rico Gutstein. The new book by Bill Bigelow, he'll be here today downstairs at noon to 2. A People's Curriculum for the Earth was just published thanks to a collective of very fine teachers in this Portland area. But I also believe after many years in the classroom, well, actually after 7 years in the classroom, I realized that it was pretty frustrating to teach social justice in a school, a traditional school, where not that many teachers were on board with what I was doing. And there was an opportunity presented itself in a working class neighborhood where I lived. A school was going to be closed. They're going to first raised and then turned into a lousy school with a lousy direct instruction mentality. And so we organized the community and demanded that the school become a two-way bilingual anti-racist social justice whole language site-based managed school. We call it La Scuola Fraternity for short. And we think it should be, my thought is schools should be centers of resistance. Community schools, centers for discussion, recreation, culture activism, certainly collaborative decision-making, and explicit commitment. And so La Scuola Fraternity was born in 1988. It was the first dual language school in Wisconsin, and it was innovative and anti-racist. You know, it was amazing. We struggled with the school board to win this, and we fully expected to lose because being a social justice advocate in this country, you lose a lot of battles, right? And so when we won, we thought, oh God, now what do we have to do? You know, now we can no longer blame the principal for everything. And it reminded me of what Fidel Castro said after the revolution. He said, you know, it was easy making the revolution. It's harder to create a new society. And hats off to Cuba for having tried that for over 50 years of isolation and attack by this country. But similarly, it's easy to win the right to open up a new school in an urban area. It's much more difficult to create one. But we have tried, and while many of my stories are in the context of that I'm going to talk today about. In terms of teaching the math, you know, I've always loved math ever since the 8th grade teacher at Cairo American College tried to destroy my love for it. I really believe that it's an essential tool. It is an essential tool, as essential as being able to speak a language if one is interested in racial and social justice. Secondly, I think teaching math in a socially meaningful way is highly motivational to children and adolescents, as we saw yesterday in one of the presentations. And teaching it also in that way has to de-emphasize the traditional teaching approaches of direct instruction and move towards a critical problem-posing approach. Similarly, connecting math to social and ecological issues throughout enlivens the rest of the curriculum, strengthens the curriculum. And I would just say that we need as classroom teachers, as teacher unions, as associations like this, really have to fight for the conditions under which teachers can actually do this work. Not only restrictions in terms of textbooks, just basic learning conditions. For many years, during the budget cuts, I basically had 30 or 45-minute planning time a week. I was with the kids all the rest of the times, and I had to teach physical education and music, which the first one I did pretty good on. The second one, I used a lot of CDs. But the biggest question that I get when I talk to people is, well, what about bias? I mean, why aren't you? I mean, aren't you? You're not being neutral. You're not being. You're being too political. In fact, I've been accused of child abuse by the local right-wing radio talk show host, based on an article I wrote in Rethinking Schools when we were doing. This is back when CD-ROM encyclopedias were the big thing, and my kids every year they had to do 5 projects, major projects. One was a biography of a person who fought for social justice in the United States or in a country that they might have come from, the kids came and said, "There's only this much on Harriet Tubman, and there's all this stuff on Thomas Edison. That's not fair." And so then we did this whole project off of it, of measuring how many inches of information there were on these people, and we just did writing about it, charts, graphs, everything. And then I wrote about it in Rethinking Schools. A year later, when I was nominated and won the Elementary Teacher of the Year award in Wisconsin, the next day, the right-wing talk show host came on the radio and said, "Bob Peterson is committing child abuse in his classroom." Child abuse. Ultimately, he admitted it was political child abuse. I didn't sexually abuse the children. Anyway, so I say to people, let's look at 2 problems. This is in a Rethinking Mathematics book. Here's this typical teacher number 1, problem-solving question, multi-digit multiplication. Group of youth go to the candy store, 14, 15, and 16. You throw that in just to confuse the kids. Candy bars are on sale for 43 cents each. They buy a total of 14 candy bars. How much do they spend, not including tax? Okay, that's a reasonable question. Or number 2. Factory workers age 14, 15, and 16. Honduras make kids' children's clothing for Walmart. Each worker earns 43 cents an hour and works a 14-hour shift each day. How much does each worker make in one day, excluding fees deducted by employers? Exactly same skills, 2 different perspectives. What I tell teachers is everything you do is political. If you're a K-5 teacher and you pick up a storybook and you start reading that book, you don't know it, but it's a political decision. Who's represented in that book? What is the storyline of the book? Is it in whatever? You get the picture. Similarly with bulletin boards, many elementary classrooms are driven sort of by a hallmark curriculum, jumping from one celebration or holiday to another. Enough said. Similarly, when I give these 2 examples, it's a response to the people say, "I can't do this. We have this textbook that I have to use." Well, the skills that we're teaching in 5th grade transcend any freaking textbook, and just start using. It's a lot more work to come up with questions, and certainly I don't pull this out of the blue. It's in the context of some social studies talk that we've had, and I'll get more into that in a few moments. The first thing, though, in my classroom that I do is I try to connect with my students, obviously, building a community of learners, as we say. And so we start by having kids in math do graphing work and talking to each other and doing investigation. And so this is an example. It says, "What is your heritage?" And so I have all my 26 students, and this is something I'd model on the overhead projector. And 6 of them are African Americans, 5 of them are Mexican American, and we have a lot of kids who are mixed in various ways, Puerto Rican, whatever. And then I model the graph with the kids coming up and helping, so Salvadoran, Puerto Rican, German American, Panamanian, Puerto Rican, African American, so on and so forth. And then they have to choose a question to ask their colleagues, and afterwards they will do the same kind of charting, and then using a computer also do some graphing. This is an example from the first one. And so the kids get clipboards, we've modeled it, we've talked about how to ask questions, how you have to ask questions to everybody in the classroom, because otherwise you don't have decent data, and that means boys and girls and all that stuff, and they are really into it. They love it. And we do this in our class, just so you know, our bilingual school is, I teach English to 25, 30 kids, and my partner teacher, who is a native Spanish speaker, teaches Spanish to 25 or 30 kids. It's the red class and the blue class, and after 2 weeks we switch. So we have a completely Spanish environment, a completely English environment, and that's what we expect of our students. So in the Spanish class, they do the same thing. They ask different questions, but they use their Spanish there. And they are into it. Off of that, we do a lot of other, let's do some more surveys. One of the things we've done over the years is we participate in No TV Week. So we've had different years, we've broken into groups, and we actually surveyed every kid in the class, doing massive surveys. How many TVs do you have? Do you have a TV in your bedroom? How many video games do you have? You know, it's a major project. This is the 4th grade TV habits, so we had groups. Just to give you an example, there's a lot of focus, but it's a number of TVs in your house. Most of them, 21% have 4 or 5, 42% have 4 or 5 or more. Here's, do you have a TV in your bedroom? This is just the straight up number. 30 kids out of 45 have a TV in their bedroom, most of which have cable. I think it's child neglect to do that, but I don't usually put that out to parents directly. The kids don't agree with me. A number of video game systems. Most people have more than 7 or 8 in their homes. That's a long story. Basically, I try to wrap math everywhere we go. So this is a picture of my classroom. If you notice up on the top, there's this timeline, which is, I brought a remnant of it here. And basically, every inch represents a year. We start in 1350, and we go to 2000, whatever the year is. And the first thing we do, I usually ask, is first day of school, where would you put me on the timeline? Where was I born? And it is really amazing. Some people think I predate Harriet Tubman. You really, but it's funny because kids seriously say, well, 1860? And then some kids will like immediately go, ah! Who can, a very good way of knowing who knows what right away. But then this is the next picture here is, if you look up, there's a student doing some map work standing on a stool, but you can see the timeline is getting filled up. Pink actually represents, this one year I did it, wars that the United States was involved in. But anyway, so the first day their homework assignment is to find out when their parents are born. They come and they put it on the timeline. Then the grandparents, and then the oldest person that they can trace back. It's funny when somebody says, yeah, my grandparent was born in 1760. And so then we stop and we do some math. And anyway, the other way I circle around is oftentimes where we have what I called AM work. Kids eat breakfast in my classroom every day. It's a real fun mess. Anyway, so oftentimes for AM work, I might take a news article and I pass out yellow markers and they have to highlight any word that has to do with math. And we read part of it depending on the article. This article obviously has a hell of a lot to do with math, considering how much we spent on the Iraq War. But I put one article in your paper that I haven't used, but it's from the New York Times. It's in the end. It's about the slave ship that was just undiscovered near South Africa, and it would just, you can imagine just the numbers, how a teacher could circle that, and there's just different ways of doing it. And then, just so you know, I have what I call a people's textbook in my classroom. Every kid gets a 3-ring binder, and it's divided with segments: songs, poetry, news articles, geography, math, and science. They have a separate reading folder. So one of the things we do in good teaching, of course, is always have a hook or whatever. And for work that I do around sweatshops and social justice and global issues, we have children one day just say, okay, where is your T-shirt from? You know this activity. Kids are looking at your T-shirt, TV, shoes, backpack, whatever, and then they put Post-it notes up on the map in the room as to where their items are from, and homework they have to go home and find 10 more items made somewhere else in the world. And we start having this incredible geography talk about how their shirt has traveled. How many miles has it traveled? Would you ever like to travel that far? You know, it's like kids, math is everywhere. And so then one of the projects we do is in Rethink Globalization, where the children are provided data that is accurate and about sweatshops in 11 different countries, and they, working in groups, have to find the country, make a map, do calculations, because they only learn, like maybe they learn what the person makes a week, and then they have to calculate by day, by hour, by month. They have to then think about it, because there's usually some other information that's provided, and they work in groups, and they use calculators, and they eventually evaluate their projects. This is one, La Verdad del Labor Infantil, and they draw maps for the El Salvador, Somos Estados Unidos. We always make sure that we're not privileging the United States, in the sense that, yes, there is child labor in the United States. Here they do analysis of the data. Here is one example, Honduras. The workers are 15 to 16 years old. They get paid 43 cents an hour. That's the information they received, and then they also received how many hours they work a week approximately. It's a little fuzzy, you can imagine. It's not exact, which leads to lots of conversations. And their commentary is that they need more money. They need money for food, is what it says there. And so here's another project that was done, sweatshops around the world. Now, interestingly, one year when I was doing this, this is one of my students. He and I wrote this in the paper. We're showing pictures of different people in sweatshop conditions, and especially child labor. And he raised his hand. He said, "I used to do that." I said, "Oh, really?" "Yeah, with my grandmother when I was in Mexico. I worked in the fields." I said, "Oh," and I thought, "You would have preferred to go to school, right?" "No." It's like, okay. And I said, "Why not?" He says, "Well, the teachers are really mean. If you misbehave, they put biting ants down your back." Now, whether or not they did that, I'm not sure, but that's what he said, okay? And that's the reason maybe his older brother told him that, and that's why he didn't want to go to school or something. But I said, well, would you like to write a poem about that, about your experience? And he did. And he said, here is based on the true life of Osvaldo. "I'm a 5-year-old boy working to support my family. I'm a boy walking for a mile just to get clean water out of the pozo. I'm a boy carrying a sack full of caña more than a mile. I'm a boy watching for snakes and scorpions while working. I'm a boy carrying food for my farm animals. I'm a boy working for hours in the sun. I'm a boy working in pain in my back and arms and legs. I'm a boy sleeping with pain and bruises on my fingers." He showed that to me, and it's like, I said, "That's great." It's like, it puts a picture in my head. It's like amazing poetry. And I said, "Would you like to write about when you came to the United States?" He said, "No." And I said, "Fine. I mean, I don't force children to describe how they got to the United States." But I said, "Well, how about how you feel now being in the United States. And so he wrote this. He gave it to me the next morning. I'm a 5-year-old boy living in the United States. I'm a boy eating strange food. I'm a boy going to school. I'm a boy seeing for my first time a show. I'm a boy having my first game station. I'm a boy seeing other people like African Americans, Puerto Ricans, and Americans. I assume he means white by that. I'm a boy living happily in my new home. I'm a boy feeling sad for being far away from my grandma and grandpa. I'm a boy getting chubbier each year for not working. Now, at the author's tea that Friday, he was first time he ever shared anything. He shared the poems with the rest of the class, and it was amazing. I mean, they were just like, as I am even today when I read that. And it shows the connections. If I hadn't done the math unit on sweatshops, that story would not have come out from Osvaldo. And his whole status in our classroom as a second language, English language learner was elevated much by that process and that experience. I had no clue that was going to happen. So part of it is moving on to the next thing is what I steal from Paulo Freire, the problem-posing approach, not the problem-solving approach, where the teacher already knows what the solution is, but the problem-posing approach. And I started the first day of the year, the first week of the school year, actually second week. I do a song of the week. First song is always Jimmy Cliff, You Can Get It If You Really Want. And sometimes it's this Why by Tracy Chapman, and she says, why do babies starve when there's enough food to feed the world? Why, when there's so many of us, are there still people still alone? Why are missiles called peacekeepers when they're aimed to kill? And why is a woman still not safe when she's in her home? Those are 4 questions that I do not know the answers to. I have some ideas. But the first one is the easiest one to talk about. And so we pull up the statistics from UNICEF rather, about children's deaths and dying, and we put up how many kids have, on an average, die a year for reasons that are easily solvable in the world. And then I say, well, how many fraternities would that take? Fraternity is the name of our school. Well, how many kids are in school? 425 kids. That means and we start visualizing what that means, and we do obviously math as we do that. But one year, I was teaching social studies, talking about one of my favorite people, George Washington, and I say that a little sarcastically. And I mentioned that he was owner of 317 slaves. And one of my other students, I said, he was a great general. He fought the British. People are multifaceted. They have strengths and weaknesses. This person, unfortunately, had slaves, and he really devastated the Iroquois Indians. One of my students raised her hand and said, well, Jackson was a slave owner too. And I said, yep, and he's on the $20 bill. And I raised that hand. Of course, everybody's grabbing. And then one of my students said, George Bush is a slave owner too. This is in 2000, right after the Supreme Court had given George Bush the election, unfortunately. It really changed history, I think. And I said, nah, you can say a lot about George Bush, but he is not a slave owner. And then somebody said, well, how many presidents did own slaves? And there was a problem posed. I didn't know it. The first thing I have on my chalk tray, I have a spiral binder called Questions We Have. So the first thing I did, I took that spiral binder over to the person and said, could you write that down? That's a great question. And I do that all the time to just, to validate any questions. And also to make sure that I don't always get thrown off, the lesson that I'm trying to teach, because students are very smart by just asking endless questions. It's fine. You're going to ask that many questions, you're going to write for a while. But then I said, well, let's figure it out. We can have an action research group. How many, anybody want to stay in for recess to do that? 5 kids, all boys, raised their hand. I just broke my stereotype there. And so we started. And they came. I had forgotten, actually, by recess time that I'd even agreed to it. Well, what should we do? What should we do? I said, well, the first thing you should do is go to the back of a dictionary and look at the presidents and make a list. There's like, let's see, Lincoln was the 16th president. Go one, here's a big piece of chart paper, 1 to 16. Write down the names of the presidents and write yes or no and put a title on. I thought that'd keep him busy, and it did for the whole lunch hour. But then the hard part came. We worked together on a regular basis trying to find information on presidents. And it wasn't easy. Now there's several sites on it, but back in 2000 there wasn't. But eventually we did talk about this, and we found that there's very little information in social studies textbooks, let's put it this way. I find the most useful thing for textbooks in our schools is to use them to critique versus to teach. And that's not only social studies textbooks. But anyway, so take a look at this as a 5th grade textbook. Jefferson owned several slaves in his lifetime, lived in a slave-owning colony, yet he often spoke out against slavery. Nothing is more certainly written in the Book of Fate that these people are to be free. So remember that they use the word several, right? Several, right? Several. Okay, let's see what several means. More than 2 or 3. Okay. Let's see how they do. Well, then I looked at James Lowen. He wrote, textbooks stress that Jefferson was a humane master, privately tormented by slavery and opposed to its expansion, not the type to destroy families by selling slaves. In truth, by 1820, Jefferson had become an ardent advocate of expansion of slavery to the Western territories, and he never let his ambivalence about slavery affect his private life. Jefferson was an average master who had his slaves whipped and sold in the Deep South as examples to induce other slaves to obey. By 1822, Jefferson owned 267 slaves. Probably not several. During his long life, of hundreds of different slaves he owned, he freed only 3, 5 more at his death, all blood relatives of his. That was an interesting conversation with the kids. So here is the chart that they came up with. And I said, well, we started spending all of math class on this data. And every kid, the 5 kids would present, and this is what every kid had to finally follow through on. And the most amazing thing here was, and this is why I love being elementary teachers, you learn so much and teaching all the subjects. I had said go up to 16. So we had to expand it to include more. Not only Andrew Johnson, which could be, but Ulysses Grant. He was the head of the Northern Army. It's like, holy. He had married someone who owned a slave. But what we found, so then we decided, well, let's look at our textbooks. And we took all those presidents. I used a textbook detective activity where they look for things in their textbook and question being researched, did Jefferson do slaves, And so they did each president. Well, it was pretty quick. They found out not any president mentioned there was slaves. So let me just back up here a second. So the kids had this conversation, what should we do? They wanted to burn the textbooks. I said, no, we don't do that. That would really look bad. The right-wing talk show host guy would really go after me then. So finally I said, let's write a letter to the publisher. Now, we have written letters throughout the year at different times. After we do the trial of Columbus, we look at Columbus books and we analyze the number of times that you hear Spaniards or Columbus or his crew speaking versus Taínos, if they even mention Taínos. We talk about stereotypes and so on, and they write to authors, and generally we don't get a response. But I said, okay, you can write. And so this is what Michelle Williams wrote. She's on the basis of the class. She says, I'm a 5th grader at La Escuela Fraternal. I'm 11 years old, and I like to read and write. When I'm reading, I notice every little word. And in your social studies book, I realize the word racism is not in your book. We had talked about that. You're acting like it's a bad word for those kids who read it. You act like teachers are going to show it to little kindergartners. But children are going to hear the word racism at some point in their life. They're going to hear it in middle school and say, oh yeah, I've heard that word, but I do not know what it means. They might as well learn in 5th grade than in high school or not even know what it means. I see that you do not mention that some presidents had slaves, but some of them did, like George Washington had 317 slaves. So did Thomas and Jefferson. He had 267 slaves. If you want to teach children the truth, then you should write the truth. The children should really know the truth about presidents. Or do you know the truth about presidents? Did you know that some of the presidents owned slaves? Because my class has done research about presidents and slaves. We have found out that John Adams did not have any slaves. We have found out that 10 out of the 18 of the first presidents did. In math, we figured out that 69% of the years between 1789 and 1877, we had a president who had been a slave owner. So all that I ask you do is that when you write another social studies book, please put the truth in the book so that most of the kids who read it will know the truth. And can you put the word racism in the book also? Kids need to know what that means too. She sent it. Yeah. Kids were charged up every day. Did they get, next day, did we get a letter back? No. Did we get a letter back? No. Get a letter back? No. I have to say that one other thing I learned from the students in this research, the only presidents who had 8-year terms up until the late 1800s were slave owners. The only presidents. Anybody who, now keep in mind that the 4-year non-slave owner presidents weren't necessarily not racist. I mean, we had a lot of baggage, Then in May, something arrives from the vice president, editor-chief of social studies. Dear Michelle, God, it was just, when she opened it up and read it, it was like the kids were like, thank you for your recent letter regarding Harcourt-Brace Social Studies United States. It's always a pleasure to hear from students and teachers using our textbooks. The first issue you wrote about concerns the absence of the word racism in the text. While the word racism does not appear, the subject of unfair treatment of people because of their race is addressed on page 467 when segregation is explained. The topic is further explained in relationship to the prejudice experienced by Asian, Mexican, and European immigrants on pages 495 to 498. There's also discussion of the civil rights movement on page 624, 625. That was when the paragraph on the bottom of 624 started, and it ended on the paragraph on the top of 625. That talks about how people of all races should have equal job opportunities and equal rights under the law. So even though the word racism is not used in the text, the concept is addressed. I'm sure you agree that that is the most important thing. The second issue you wrote about concerns the fact that some United States presidents own slaves. There are many facts about presidents that are not included in the text, simply because we do not have room for them all. I congratulate you and your classmates for doing independent research. Another source you might want to use is Harcourt Learning Center site, blah, 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 where you'll find additional information on such topics as presidents, the Amistad case, and the new Georgia flag. Again, thank you for writing to us, besides best wishes, so on and so forth. It was very empowering for the kids to get back this letter, the fact that somebody even paid attention to them. And in fact, I've used this in workshops saying, look, this is, first of all, we have to address the issue of race. I say that in our union, in our organizations, we have to put that issue on the table. White people in this country don't have a lot of experience talking about it, but other people in this country do, and we can learn from all of you who are in that category. I talk, okay, another, let me check the number. Okay, I'm hanging there. So another hook that I use when I talk about place value large numbers is I pull out a package of dollar bills that I've gone to the bank to get. I don't usually carry $100 bills in my, and I start counting. Actually, only 60. I go 1. I do it by second. 2, 3, and they're all looking at me. I'm counting $1 per second, right? I get up to 60, and by then kids are like, I want that, and but I have 100% attention. And I say, there's a lot of different ways depending on the situation what I do, but I said, how much would it take? How much time would it take to count up to 100? Well, that's a hard one. 120 would be a lot easier, right? How about 1,000? 10,000? 1,000,000? I said, and so we've all, it's not like kids in 5th grade haven't had any experience to place value. So well, let's take a guess. Let's say, how about of course, some people like Godzillion or they want, but we say, okay, 1,000,000. How many, and we have kids guess, and then we have kids in groups figure out with calculators. And it's a way to get people really engaged in trying to conceptualize large numbers. Now, I've done that a lot in working around issues of social justice issues. And certainly one of the benefits of living in a country like the United States, which is an imperialist country, is there's always a war going on. And there's always a war going on that you can critique. And I say that flippantly, but really sadly. I mean, the children who are in 9th grade today have been living under the shadow of war their entire life. And war is a new normal in the United States, just like whiteness is a normal in the United States. And that's something that we have to push back on. And it doesn't mean that I tell kids to be against the war. I tell kids we're going to talk about the war. In fact, we're reading A Number of Stars. It's a Laurie book about Germany and the exodus of Jews from Denmark. And the word occupation came up. The Nazis were occupying. And the kids didn't understand what occupation meant. They thought it was a job. An occupation is a job. And I said, well, it's like what the United States, what we are accused of in Iraq. And they said, what's going on in Iraq? And this is after the war had been going on for a couple of years, and it's like becomes the normal, right? And so we started looking at it. We went to thecostofwar.com, which is a great website, which talks about, and that you can see the numbers going up like this, and ultimately it led to a group. They wanted to form a club against the war, so it met during lunch hour, not on official school time, and ultimately, we had some speakers come in, and we did a lot of work on numbers. Actually, I'll read to you. I remember I read the poem from Osvaldo to you about his immigration and his child labor. Later that year, I was going to do a keynote at a math conference in New York, and I asked him, I said to the class, if anybody wants to say why numbers count are so important, please do that. And here's the poem he said. He said it was addressed to President Bush. This is back in the day. Numbers count. Numbers do count, Mr. President. 2,453 American soldiers are dying. 17,648 soldiers are wounded. 161 innocent Iraqi people are dying. 281,864,948,707 are wasted in the war. Imagine how much we can do around the world with that money. We can feed the needy, we can build houses, we can give scholarships, and much more. Do you care about the people? I do. That was Osvaldo. So once a month, the Peace Action Group in Milwaukee would protest on the main corner downtown. And I took any interested student. I had to get parent permission. I had to ignore the rule from the school board that I couldn't drive students. And we went, and it was incredibly empowering. Kids all wanted to go. The parents had to agree. I did not vote for him, she points. And the group is called CAW, Kids Against the War. There's one day, the group, 1 month, they went down. So, going back to my chance of birth, I wanted to share a few more things. I have about a few more minutes left. I'd said in the beginning, I thought, okay, chance of birth. Well, there's an activity that I do. I also call it the chocolate chip cookies activity, where we do a simulation around the distribution of world population and wealth. And so the kids get a chart with the continents, and we talk about, I say we're going to have 25 little chips that have red and yellow on one side, those chips, counting chips. And I say, first of all, we say, how many people do you think are in the world? How many people are in the Milwaukee? how many people, it's really sad when they think more people live in Milwaukee than in the world. There's some real problem here. I don't know if it's mathematical or geographical or just whatever. Anyway, we finally get that there's, depending on the year, 6 billion, 7 billion. We divide it by 25. And so that's how much each chip represents, about 290 million, 300 million, depending on how fast it goes up. And then I say, okay, so in groups, you have 25 chips, you have 7 continents, place the chips how you think they should be, representing where the people live. Some kids put a chip on Antarctica because they don't want to make Antarctica feel sad. But there are not 250 million people living in Antarctica. And generally, people put a lot of chips on the United States because they think a lot of, the center of the world is the United States. And then we do go through it, and they put the right, we go through it. This is like a 4 or 5 day lesson. The next day we do wealth. It's a little more difficult to calculate. Rico and I have worked on that in terms of what's our best guess in the in rethinking mathematics. And so then they find out, do the wealth, or the kids are happy once they've done that. And afterwards, what we do is we go out to the playground map, and to begin with, actually at the playground map, we have like 25, 30 kids, and on a percentage basis, I have where they're from. So they have a big box that says chance of birth. And they pull it out. Oh, I'm in the we have US, Canada, I'm in Asia, I'm in Africa, and the kids have to go stand there. And so we have a lot of people standing in Asia. We have about 1.5 people standing in the United States, depending on how we round it, how many people we have. And then I distribute the wealth. They each have a bag that says wealth, and I give chocolate chip cookies out. And the people in Europe and the United States have a lot more wealth, a lot fewer people. And you can get where this is going. And in Africa, very, very few cookies, like a half a cookie. And there's 3 people in Africa, only one in the United States. And anyway, and then there's a negotiator, the tag. They're the only people who can move, or so I say initially. And they go around and talk, and will you give me some help, and da-da-da. And eventually, it's usually, I don't do this with only one adult. I always have an extra adult with me. And they go and negotiate and talk. Sometimes there's mass migration. Sometimes there's near war. And ultimately, this is Asia group is consulting how they're going to handle things. One year, the kid who got the wealth in Asia ate all the cookies, didn't distribute them. He did live that day. But my point is, and eventually we end chaotically, and I say, you know what, anybody who gets up to the classroom in one piece will all get a cookie. So don't worry if you didn't get a cookie. And then we unpack it. There's a lot of problems with this simulation. It doesn't talk about the division of wealth within a country. It doesn't represent the violence of lack of wealth to many people around the world. There's a whole series of things that are problematic with this, but it does raise in kids' minds why. Their question is, why is it like this? Why is there such inequality? And I don't say it's because of, capitalism or imperialism or history. I don't give them a pat answer. I say, that's a really good question. People have a lot of different points of view on this. Some people blame so-and-so, you can imagine. This is the Africa, and here's, I think, a United States person giving assistance. It's not tied to U.S. companies. And then we do this activity afterwards, which you are probably familiar with, the 10 chairs of equality, which is if you have the kids, I have 10 chairs in front of my classroom. The chairs represent 10% of the wealth in the United States. The kids represent 10% of the population. And then basically one person, 10%, has to rearrange himself to own 70% of the wealth. And his arm, or her arm, 1% represents 40% of the wealth in the United States. It's an amazing activity to do with people. It's a little hard when kids sit on top of each other, but they get it. So, boy, I'm wrapping up. Teachers, And just close by saying I think teachers have to be what I call organic activist intellectuals. We have to, and I'm talking about a lot of classroom teachers, but obviously college teachers, any teacher. We have to really stand up and see the power of our collective action, power of organization. We have to participate in movements for economic and social democracy and practice civic courage. That's a term from Giroux, which is we should act as if we live in a democracy. We should act as if we live in a democracy. We have to be advocates for just policies in civil society, and we have to promote social justice teacher unionism and social justice pedagogy. You know, there is an attack. There is an attack going on. This is my concluding words. This man is not Koch, he's Walker. And he brutally, 4 years ago, attacked the public sector. This is an example of people showing their distrust in the state capitol. And it was an amazing uprising. It reminds me of what Paulo Freire's words are, is that conflict is a midwife of consciousness. And it really has turned the tide in terms of politics with teachers. They know education is political. They know they have to stand up. They know they have to do the right thing for our kids. And with that, I'll just say thank you very much.
I would say thank you, but he's given me too hard a job. I told a story in our discussion group. I'm Tony Conn, of a drama conference that I attended. And at that drama conference, the young people put on an event. And at the end of the event, there was a Q&A. And they were asking the young people, what's important about drama? What does drama do that maybe other subjects don't do? And one of the girls said, well, you don't come out of mathematics crying. Well, not in a good way. And one of the things that I found myself doing at this conference is crying in a good way. And you made me cry in a good way again. Oh, it's gone right to the end. We'll start there. Any response is kind of a response to your initial response when you read the paper. So what I'm now doing is responding to my response that I wrote. It's a funny thing to try and do because there are so many different responses in the room. You will all be responding. You will all have written different things down. You'll all take different things away. One of the first things I wrote down is linked to that quote that's up there. And it was when Bob talked about noticing. And it's a way of thinking about social justice. I think one of the things that's linked to a lot of the speakers today is that they notice injustice. And when it's not just the noticing injustice, it's then thinking, I need to do something. What is it that I can do about that injustice that I've noticed? And it's kind of not a choice, or else we wouldn't think that bit about what can we do. And I use the Rawls theory of justice quite often when I'm working with all sorts of people. And it's the idea of the veil of ignorance. So that whilst we're in this room, whilst we're sitting here, society out there has completely changed. It's a bit like being a kid. When we're a kid, we think society is like our family. We kind of don't know the position we hold in society. If we imagine that while we're sitting here, the society out there has completely changed, we're under a veil of ignorance. We have our coffee, we go back outside, and we've taken a new place in that society because the society has completely changed. If it was a just society, that wouldn't concern us because we would be quite happy to take up any position in that society, because it is a just society. That's our way of noticing injustice, because clearly we don't live in a just society. So how does that help me as a teacher? It might help me as a teacher because I can think, okay, let me look at the spaces that I work in. It's exactly what Bob's been doing. Let me look at the spaces that I work in. Let me think about the people that I work with. Would I be perfectly happy for my children, for people that I love, to exchange places with any one of those other people in the classroom? And the answer might well be no. If the answer is no, I think, what do I need to do to change my practice within the spaces in which I work to make those spaces more socially just? So that actually I would be perfectly happy for my child to be in that classroom, which is exactly what Bob was saying about making the school. That can then lead to action. Then, of course, what we notice is what's been the result of that action. Because we will have transformed something, but that always leads to, oh, now that person is the least powerful in this situation. So that was something that was running through my head all the way through and ran through my head as I was reading the paper. Let's see what happens next. Let's see what slide comes up next. I'm not joking, that's towards the end. One of the things that I was thinking about as I read the paper, and particularly with Anita yesterday, was this focus on the word curriculum and a focus on the type of activity. And it's fascinating reading something and then hearing the something. And actually the hearing talked about all sorts of other things, not curriculum. So there were useful activities that we could do, but it was also talking about assessment practices. What do we value in our assessment? What do kids think we are valuing? And therefore, kids act in a way to please you, don't they? So what are they noticing that we're valuing? You completely changed the structural practices in school. You created a new school. So it's not just about the curriculum. And most of all, it's about this. It's about what you do with those activities. It's about allowing the kids to ask the questions and pose the questions. So it's the pedagogy of empathy that Anita talked about yesterday. And next, I kind of know where we're going now. Trying to tie some things together that I think are threads that come through the conference. Because in terms of responding to day 3, all sorts of things from day 1 and day 2 and day 3 are going through my head. So Ubi talked about a school being a space not only for instruction, but primarily for socializing and criticizing what is observed and felt in everyday life. I think you were showing us that, Bob. In one of your responses, Ola, you talked about working on the little steps whilst being concerned with the big issues. That's not just a little thing tapping you on your shoulder, it's actually the thing you are trying to do is the big issues. What we do is what we can do, little steps that we can do in all of the different spaces that we work. Anita talked about developing a pedagogy of empathy through which we all speak against oppression. Again, that felt as though it was coming through all of the time in what Bob was saying. And Bob, in the paper, we must individually and collectively say enough and join with parents and community partners to ensure our teaching fosters a deep understanding of our society and the disposition necessary to stand on the side of social justice. So the kids that are coming out of our classrooms start to notice things and then change things in their lives. And by transforming our little practices, the kids then are in a space where they can transform their spaces, which does transform the world that we live in. And there was a lot of talk about righteous anger. I think one of the things about crying in the right way, I remember a student of mine coming in and being in tears in my office and apologising. And I said, no, don't apologise. You're crying because it's important. Emotion is important, isn't it? So righteous anger is something that's important if it enables us to act. And it was a question that was posed 2 days ago. And Danny's response was, we find out what to do by listening to those who are most affected. So I want to share something with you from maybe one of those people that's most affected. This is a good friend and colleague of mine called Marisa McKeith. Marisa's got cerebral palsy. And I first met her when she was doing an English literature degree at Nottingham Trent University, where I was working. Marisa's in a wheelchair. You'll see her in a moment. And until she was 9, nobody knew that she could communicate. So from the age 0 to 9, she'd been sitting in a wheelchair, being fed. Her mum sensed that there was something more to Marisa than that. And so developed a form of communication that's become known as facilitated communication. Where Marisa, she can't, again you'll see in a moment, she can't actually tap out words, but if you hold her finger, you can sense where her finger's going, and she can tap out words on a keyboard. Her first words to her mum were, "Why did that take you so long?" And then, like I say, I think she was 23, 24 when I first met her. She was completing her English literature degree. And she now is a guest lecturer on courses that myself and my wife Helen run. And she's a poet and she's a filmmaker. And I want to show you a piece of film about her latest project. Just read through that and then we'll show the clip. The only thing she puts about herself on her Facebook page is, "I'm active in inclusion politics." One of the ways that she's active is that's a piece of evidence that she gave to the government select committee who are looking at special educational needs in school. And Marisa said, "Along with our families, we have been victims of a whole way of thinking about disability that is fundamentally mistaken. A whole system's been developed called special education. We're diagnosed, labelled, and sent away or separated to have our special educational needs met. Our ordinary needs, such as love, friendship, security, play, and often education, do not get met." So Marisa refuses to use the term special needs because she says, they're not special. That's an ordinary need. I need to be fed by somebody. That's not a special need. That's an ordinary need. This is a little clip, well, it's 6 minutes, 27-second clip of a group that she's running at the moment, writing poetry.
Quiet Riots is a collective of individuals who all use alternative forms of communication. We meet in the Manchester area once a month or so to get together be present to each other's thinking and voices, and try to make a small but telling impact on a world that may not know we exist.
I love to be here. I am glad that you all came. We all celebrate the wonderful news that Anthony will be free soon.
Hey. Hey.
I brought some champagne to celebrate it. Let's bring a toast on Anthony and Joe. And she has also a question, how is Maurice's new home?
We are gathering the words of members of the group to be presented in an anthology of work titled Quiet Rights Collected. I'm here to talk about two things: ongoing collection of writing from the group to become an anthology. A lot of our members write, so this felt the perfect time to push and press our collective and individual voices into one. Necessary place of access.
So there's something there about voice and different voices, and thinking about, so what would schools be like if Marisa could access schools? Marisa did go into school. She was granted access to a secondary school age 12 and spent the first term sitting in a room on her own. So you can imagine this. She was delighted, her parents were delighted because she'd been given access to school, but the school didn't know what to do and wheeled her into a room on her own. And You know, she says, I've got a clear memory of going to school in the taxi, being wheeled out and being stuck in the school. But Marisa has a vision, and I think we've seen examples of that vision. And we'll finish on just a couple. She wrote a chapter in a book called, what's that book called? You had a chapter in as well. Towards an Ethics of Social Justice in Education, and Marisa wrote a chapter in it. And her vision, it's longer than this, I've just taken 2 bits. My vision is to have a world where we all know how to listen to each other and care for each other. To get there, we need to grow up together. She talks about vulnerability. She says, one of the things that I offer is an understanding of the commonality of vulnerability. That we are all vulnerable at different stages, and actually by sharing the commonality of vulnerability, we move towards a world where we understand each other. My vision is that we create a system of learning that prioritizes our relationships with each other rather than how we achieve in competition with each other. And that came to mind because that feels like the sort of school that Bob was developing. So it was less about the mathematics of the activities, even though that was important. It was about developing a system of learning that was prioritizing relationships with each other and with the world, and developing relationships that meant that the children could act on the world. And now I think it's time for coffee.